Well, most of the election campaign coverage at any election is focused on the lower house seats, which determine ultimately who forms government. There's always a contest going on in the Senate, of course, and this year's is pretty interesting. I'm joined now by Ben Oquist, Executive Director for the Australia Institute, and in a moment, political consultant Glenn Drury will join us. You might remember his name. He was once infamously known as the Preference Whisperer. Ben Oquist, we've got you first. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks, Fran.
Ben, we've been talking a lot about what seats to watch, but what about the Senate race? You're a Senate watcher from way back. Do we see any surprises coming in the Senate?
Oh, we do, Fran. And it's important to remember that people have got two votes. You're right. The first vote with the House of Representatives ultimately determines who forms government, but it's often the Senate that determines what comes next. And Australia has a powerful Senate, effectively the same powers as the House of Representatives. Can block any government legislation. It's been famous for blocking supply in the past, and there's been a lot of focus on the House and whether there'll be a minority parliament, whether the crossbench will have balance of power. But one thing we know already before anyone's cast a ballot is that the crossbench will again hold balance of power in the Senate. Neither major party will control the Senate following the election. Only half the Senate goes to the polls each time, 6 senators in each state. Let's go through the basic maths. Generally, the coalition wins at least 2 of those seats and Labor wins at least 2 of those seats, leaving 2 seats being fought out between the coalition and minor parties. And there are a number of interesting Senate races around the country that will determine the overall balance of power in the Senate.
OK. Well, let's go to some of them now. Let's go to Queensland, because the way I see it, the big contest there could be for one of those seats between Clive Palmer and Pauline Hanson. Or am I wrong? Could they both get up? Who's likely to win a contest there in your view?
Well, I think you're right. It has boiled down to that. A lot of people have talked about Queensland as being interesting because the coalition is trying to win 3 seats. Senator Amanda Stoker is trying to win the 3rd seat for the coalition. But I think given where the polls are, it's very difficult for her. And really, I think the Greens are going to win a seat in Queensland. All the evidence points to the Greens actually being on a tear in Queensland, and their vote, our polling has their vote up in Queensland, so that gives them a seat. Presumably Labor will win 2 seats this time.
They didn't last time, did they?
No, they had a terrible election last time, but most people would think they will win 2, and the coalition will win 2. And the Greens will be 1, leaving 1 last seat to be fought over. And there was talk that the coalition was in the hunt, but I think you're right. I think the more likely possibility is it's a race between Pauline Hanson and Clive Palmer, who's actually heading the ticket there. And our polling has had United Australia Party creeping up and now level pegging with Pauline Hanson for that last seat. Now, I think most people think in the end Pauline Hanson will get there, but I do think there is now a chance that Clive Palmer could knock out Pauline Hanson, and it is one of the interesting races to watch. But there are plenty others around the country too. Yeah,
we'll come to those. But just to say with Queensland, former Liberal MP George Christensen quit the party at this election. He joined One Nation. He's number 3 on their ticket, so that's completely unwinnable there in that 3rd Senate spot. But does his presence, do you think, pull votes across to One Nation, his anti-vax votes versus Clive Palmer's freedom sort of wagon?
Yeah, I don't think so. I think he's well down the ticket. I think he's pretty immaterial to the campaign. But there's no doubt that this time Clive Palmer and Pauline Hanson are feeding into a genuine constituency. And I think Palmer in the past has been just kind of all over the place. Now it's small, but the anti-lockdown, anti-vax vote is real. And Palmer is struggling to get that off Pauline Hanson. Now, there's probably enough between them to win a Senate seat. They're partly cannibalising each other's vote. But you'd imagine in Queensland there's enough between them to win a Senate vote. Actually, we've found that the Palmer vote has been as strong in Victoria as it has been in Queensland, potentially as a response to the lockdowns in Victoria. Small, but just as strong there as it was in Queensland.
OK.
Having said that, of course, he's competing with Pauline Hanson in Queensland, so they're splitting the vote there to some extent.
All right, I think we've got Glenn Drury joining us now. Glenn, thank you very much for joining us. We've just been talking a lot about Queensland, but can we go to another of the Senate races now? And I'm looking at Tasmania, where Eric Abetz has posters and billboards everywhere, I'm told, across the Apple Isle. He's in the unwinnable 3rd spot on the Liberal ticket. Will Eric Abetz surprise us and get up below the line? Do you think he's in a contest with Jackie Lambie for a seat? Glenn, do you have a view on this?
I think that last spot in Tasmania is up for grabs, and I'd have to say the smart money is on Jackie. or Jackie's candidate. I think that Eric will be buying the equivalent of the Age or the Herald on Monday after the election and looking for a new job. Honestly, the smart money's got to be on Jackie. I think Tasmania will come down to probably 2 Labor, a Green, 2 Libs, and that last spot will be a fight, but Jackie is most likely to win that fight.
Okay. Ben, do you think if Eric Abetz did manage to get up, that would that necessarily be at the cost of one of the other Liberals above the line?
Well, briefly? It's interesting. I think it's unlikely. I think Glenn's right. I think the Jackie Lambie Network's in the box seat there, despite some new parties there, like the local party having a go. I think her candidate is in the box seat. But it is interesting that you point about Eric Abetz's signs being all over the state. I'm reliably informed, like you, Fran, that they certainly are. But he's urging people to vote below the line. Now, vote below the line for him means effectively voting against the number 1 and number 2 candidates on the ticket, and I think it's hard. I think in a double dissolution, we have seen Tasmanian senators win in such a strategy. Lisa Singh for Labor Party won, but it was in a double dissolution election. Okay. Tasmanian voters are used to voting below the line because of the Hare-Clark system in the House of Representatives, but I think in a half Senate, it's hard. And I do think that there's a big chance that Jackie Lambie Network could oust Eric Abetz at this election. All
right. Can we look at the ACT? Because there was a big splash in the Canberra Times this week suggesting that Labor's Katie Gallagher could be ousted by the independent running David Pocock, former Wallaby captain, of course. 2 spots. 4 contenders, big contenders in the main box seat. Zed Segelja on the Conservative side, Katie Gallagher, David Pocock and Kim Rubenstein, 2 independents on the other side. Glenn, is Katie Gallagher in trouble, do you think?
I think that the territories are the hardest to win. The quota for a Senate spot elsewhere in the country is about 14.29%, or it is 14.29%. In the ACT, of course, it's just over 33%. While I acknowledge that there is a possibility that the independent could win, I think it's going to be a very tough call to get to that magic 30% plus. That's a long way up for an independent. So my view is it'll probably be the status quo will remain.
All right, you're there in the ACT, Ben. Just briefly, what do you think?
Oh, it's been a huge campaign from Pocock. You know, the polling had him at 10%. 2 or 3 weeks ago, and now at 20%. So he's a big chance. You heard Katie Gallagher on radio this morning talking about not taking the seat for granted and not being entitled to it, and she was working hard for it. I do think it's a big contest. It is hard for a non-major party candidate to break through, but if anybody could do it, Pocock can do it. And for once, the ACT's got a contest. That's good for democracy, if nothing else.
Well, I tell you, there's a contest in South Australia, Glenn, an old face on the ballot papers, Nick Xenophon, trying to get up.
Yeah.
To quote the Castle, tell him he's dreaming. What do you think?
Look, the voters are fickle. You know, Nick's been out of the scene now for a little while, and people tend to forget. Let's not forget what Paul Keating alluded to over 30 years ago, that voters aren't too bright. And I think it's going to be hard for the voters to find Nick on the ballot paper. He's at position U, as I recall. He doesn't have his name above the line, so he's just got a little square above the line. People are going to have to go hunting to find Nick. And we know from the example of the New South Wales 2011 election, when Pauline Hanson ran as a grouped independent, she just had that little box above the line without her name, and she struggled. She really struggled. Okay. In fact, the informal vote was very high. But that last spot in South Australia is certainly up for grabs. In my view, we will probably get 2 Labor and a Green, 2 Libs, and that last spot. Who's going for it? Look, the short odds are probably on Nick, but I wouldn't take anything for granted.
All right, we are almost out of time, so I need to ask both of you for a prediction, really, if you would. At the end of all this, what's the Senate going to look like? Who's going to hold the balance of power? Glenn?
If Labor wins, it'll be the Greens. If the coalition wins, if ScoMo finds another miracle, and they could be hard to come by, but if he does, it'll be a combination of Pauline, of Jackie Lambie Network, and possibly another minor party.
Ben Oquist, how do you see it?
Well, interesting you focus on South Australia there. I think it's the most interesting and important state Senate race in this country. The Greens are trying to get up a new Senator, Barbara Pocock, there, who's got a good chance. Nick Xenophon's trying to make a return. Rex Patrick's trying to stay in the Senate. And if Labor and the Greens could win 4 seats between them, it would materially change the balance of power in the Senate. So it's a small state, but I think the balance of power could well be determined by what happens in South Australia.
OK, we'll be hanging on watching for that. I think we're not going to get a result on the Senate on the night, that's for sure. It usually takes a lot longer. Ben Oquist, Glenn Drury, thanks so much for joining us.
Thanks, Glenn. Thanks, Fran.